Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On September 30th, 2025, Florida plans to carry out its 13th execution of the year, a record pace not seen since the death penalty returned in the 1970s. The man scheduled to die is Victor Tony Jones, a 64-year-old inmate who has spent more than 3 decades on death row. His story is one of violence, betrayal, and decades of legal battles that have stretched all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It began in December of 1990 in Miami-Dade County. Jacob and Matilda Nestor were a married couple in their mid-60s, still running their small business with honesty and determination. They gave opportunities to people who needed work, and one of those people was Victor Jones. But within days of being hired, Jones betrayed that trust. According to the evidence presented at trial, he launched a robbery that turned brutally violent. He stabbed Matilda Nestor once at the base of her neck, severing her aorta. He stabbed Jacob Nestor in the chest, the blade piercing directly into his heart. Even mortally wounded, Jacob showed a desperate will to fight. He staggered into a back office, pulled the knife from his chest, tried to dial for help, and then reached for a .22 caliber pistol. He fired 5 times, hitting Jones once in the forehead. That gunshot wound would later require surgery, but it did not save Jacob or Matilda. Both died from their injuries before help could arrive. When police arrived, Jones was still at the scene. In his pockets, they found the Nestor's money and belongings. Clear evidence of the robbery. The case against him was overwhelming. In 1993, a jury heard the details. They learned of the violence, the theft, and Jacob's last desperate moments. Jurors unanimously recommended death for Jacob's murder, and by a 10-2 vote for Matilda's. The judge imposed 2 death sentences, along with convictions for armed robbery. The state pointed to aggravating circumstances. The murders were committed during a robbery, for financial gain, and with particular brutality. Jones's defense tried to present mitigating evidence: a childhood marked by abandonment, possible emotional disturbances, claims of substance abuse, and psychiatric testimony. But in the end, the scales tipped toward death. Jones entered Florida's death row in the early 1990s. Decades passed. Long years of isolation, routines, and appeals. He lived out his days in a concrete cell while the families of Matilda and Jacob carried their grief. Inside prison, testimony later revealed, Jones learned how to navigate the system. He filed grievances, submitted written requests, maintained his cell, and took his medications. These details, presented by prison staff and experts, would later become crucial in evaluating whether he met the legal definition of intellectual disability. Like many capital cases, Jones's conviction was not the end of the story. In 1995, the Florida Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. But that was only the beginning of a series of appeals spanning 3 decades. A central argument has been that Jones is intellectually disabled and therefore constitutionally barred from execution under the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Atkins versus Virginia. His lawyers pointed to IQ scores hovering in the low 70s and argued he had significant deficits in adaptive behavior, with signs of onset before the age of 18. The courts examined this in detail. In 2007, after a full evidentiary hearing, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that Jones did not meet the legal standard for intellectual disability. The state's expert, Dr. Suarez, testified that although Jones may have had a borderline IQ, his functioning in prison, the ability to communicate, follow rules, and manage his environment, showed he did not have the adaptive deficits required by law. Jones's defense countered with their own expert, Dr. Eisenstein, who argued that Jones's childhood history of abandonment and low intellectual functioning did meet the criteria. But the court disagreed, concluding that he failed at least one of the 3 required prongs. present adaptive deficits. In 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court decided Hall v. Florida, striking down the state's rigid IQ cutoff of 70. This opened the door for new claims. Jones quickly filed another motion, arguing that his prior test scores and deficits should be reconsidered under the new standard. But in 2015, a Florida circuit court denied his motion. Judges ruled that he had already had the chance to present extensive evidence at earlier hearings, and he still failed to prove all three criteria. That denial was later upheld. In August 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant. The execution was set for September 30th at 6 p.m. inside Florida State Prison. With that warrant, deadlines came fast. Jones's attorneys filed last-minute petitions, again raising the intellectual disability issue. The Florida Supreme Court set a hard deadline, 1 p.m. on September 12th, 2025, for any notice of appeal or writ petition. As of mid-September, those filings are the only hope left to stop the execution. If they fail, Jones will be moved to a holding cell next to the execution chamber on the morning of September 30th. He will be allowed visits from spiritual advisors and may request a last meal, though Florida limits it to $40, purchased locally. As the evening approaches, he'll be strapped to a gurney, IV lines placed, and lethal injection prepared. Witnesses will watch through glass as the drugs flow. Jones's execution is not happening in isolation. For the Nestor's family, it has been 35 years of waiting. Justice to them may finally feel complete. Yet for others, questions remain. Did Jones's troubled background and borderline intellectual functioning lessen his culpability? Is 3.5 decades on death row itself a form of cruel punishment? Does executing an aging man bring closure, or just perpetuate another cycle of loss? On that December day in 1990, Jacob and Matilda Nestor's lives were stolen in an act of greed and betrayal. Jacob's last act, trying to defend his wife even as his own life ebbed away, is a haunting reminder of love and courage in the face of horror. On September 30th, 2025, if no court intervenes, the state of Florida will take the life of Victor Tony Jones. For some, that moment will represent long-delayed justice. For others, it will raise difficult questions about the death penalty itself. But no matter where you stand, the story of the Nestors and the crime that ended their lives must not be forgotten. Thank you for watching and for honoring the memory of Matilda and Jacob Nestor with me today. These stories are painful, but they matter, because behind every case are real people whose lives were cut short. If you found this video meaningful, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to True Crime Bites, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upcoming story. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. After 35 years, does this execution bring justice, or does it raise more questions? Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next story.